When and how did the Grand Canyon form?
The Grand Canyon is 277 miles long, varies from 3,000 to 6,000 feet deep, and 4 to 18 miles wide. It's the only natural feature on the Earth's surface that can be seen from the moon. So how and when did the Grand Canyon form? Well, there's three undisputed observations. First of all, everyone agrees that the plateau was there before the Colorado River. But that creates a problem because you see the headwaters of the Colorado River are at a lower elevation than the plateau itself. So how could the water go uphill to carve out the Grand Canyon? And then everyone agrees on the scale of the erosion. 1,000 cubic miles from the canyon itself and 100,000 cubic miles of rock layers from above the rim rocks of the Grand Canyon. So how did the Grand Canyon form when it actually cuts through a plateau? It doesn't go around the plateau. In fact, the headwaters of the Colorado River are at a lower elevation than the plateau it cuts through. And everyone agrees that the plateau was there before the Colorado River got there and supposedly carved out the Grand Canyon. Well, it couldn't carve out the Grand Canyon if it's at a lower elevation. Its headwaters are at a lower elevation than the canyon itself. Now, there's always been a secular controversy about when exactly it formed, the Grand Canyon. The conventional geologists have argued whether it was 70 million years ago when the plateau was uplifted, or even as recently as 6 million years ago. They don't know. They also don't know how it formed. Originally, they thought that the Colorado River carved out the canyon slowly because the plateau rose slowly at the same speed, and so it kept on cutting down as the plateau went up. But that doesn't work because of the dating and the plateau being there before the Colorado River was. So now they think, well, there was a stream that eroded from the west through the plateau to capture the headwaters of the Colorado River that were then draining out through the little Colorado River. But that doesn't make sense because you still have the same problems of what slow and gradual erosion can accomplish. But we do know that there is evidence there in the Grand Canyon of rapid and recent catastrophic erosion. For example, the debris from the Grand Canyon is not in the delta of the Colorado River. The cliffs are stable. There's no debris at the bottom of the cliffs. If it was millions of years of slow erosion, there should still be large amounts of debris or talus at the bottom of the cliffs, but they're not there. It's as if it was all swept away when the canyon was carved. And that makes sense. We know of examples of catastrophic erosion. On March 18, 1982, a mud flow from the sides of Mount St. Helens ripped its way 100 foot deep into a canyon system that formed 1/40th the scale of the Grand Canyon. Then we know from the evidence that in the channeled scablands in the Pacific Northwest, 500 cubic miles of water burst through a natural dam and in 48 hours eroded out a 15,000 square miles area. So when was the Grand Canyon formed? Well, if we look at the evidence in the light of God's Word, it's clear that as the flood waters retreated, the mountains rose, the valleys sank, and those waters would have drained off the plateau country that was rising up to rip off that 100,000 cubic miles of rock. And then as the water's flow receded and slowed down, it would start to carve a channel. But by that time, the plateau was so high, it was damming those receding flood waters to the east, making huge natural dams. That dammed water was added to by post-flood rainfall, so that eventually the spillway of that natural dam overflowed and a lot of water, a little bit of time, burst through and ripped out the Grand Canyon. So when we examine the evidence in God's world, in the light of God's Word, we see agreement. And that's exactly what we would expect because God is a true and faithful witness.